Welcome, everybody, back to another episode with Crossover Sports Talk and Events. Hope you're all doing well. Just wanted to come on today, have some few things to talk about the NBA Finals in Game One. What a finish by the Indiana Pacers, upsetting the Oklahoma City Thunder in Game One, 111 to 110, with Tyrese Halliburton with the game-winning shot with about zero point 0.3 seconds left in the game for them to uplift them to defeat the Thunder. But man, oh man, that was a game. That was something to watch. How collective of a team effort of once again another fourth quarter comeback by the Indiana Pacers. They've been doing it all postseason, as you saw in the against Milwaukee in the first round, against the Cavs a few times in the second round, and including you saw it against the Knicks about one time against in game one, in that game one that they had against the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then now you see it again last night of game one of the NBA Finals. What a finish that was. Cahoots to them, cahoots out to them. This should be a very, very nice series. I think it's going to be a very interesting series. You know, Indiana did their job of stealing one game on the road and now taking over home court advantage, heading back to Indiana for games 3 and 4. We should see how interesting this should be for a potential great game 2 that's going to be coming up Sunday on ABC for NBA Finals Game 2 presented by YouTube TV. I also wanted to get into my sponsors for today. Please reach out to if you have anything for sale. AJ and Michelle Chand for real estate and loans. Call 916-549-2425. Once again, it's 916-549-2425. The email's right there in the ticker below. Ajnesh.chand@xprealty.com, sponsored by Crossover Sports Talk. And now I want to get into as well more of the top performers. I want to talk about in game two of game one, excuse me, of the NBA Finals. Pascal Siakam had about 19 points, you know, and 10 rebounds, a double double for him. And then Aaron Nesmith with another solid 10 points. And then Miles Turner with a solid 15 points. He came up huge in the fourth quarter. And then also with Andrew Nembhard making some big shots in the fourth quarter with 14 points. And then Tyrese Halliburton with another double-double, 14-10, hitting the clutch game-winning shot. And then also I wanted to mention would be Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin hit some 5 3-pointers, 5 for 8 from 3, 6 for 9 shooting overall, had 17 points. He was a major contributor offensively and defensively in this game, lifting them over the Oklahoma City Thunder. The one thing about them I'd like to really mention is no lead is pretty much safe with them. I think people really have gotten way too comfortable. I think, including starting with the Bucks with about a minute left. I think they were down like 7 or 9 points, and they still came back and won, including game two. I mean, game in the second round. The Cavs were up about 10, 14, 15 points. They would just hang around there. The Pacers, you know, they wouldn't be playing their best. And then they'd come out and just snatch the game in the fourth quarter. You know, great coaching. I think it would be by Rick Carlisle and the adjustments he makes. And then including what they did in game one of the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, when they were down about 17 with about 6 minutes to go. And they came back and just snatched it from the Knicks. And they were down about 9, I think, with a minute left or 55 seconds, if I were to say. Correct me if I'm wrong with that. But no, they never gave up until that final buzzer sounds, and they've been great all postseason. This is going to be one interesting way they finish off this NBA Finals. It's going to be really interesting. So shout out to them. It's going to be really interesting to see what we see with the Oklahoma City Thunder, how they bounce back for Game 2. They absolutely, I think, need to take Game 2 on their home court. You know, it's very important, especially going to Indiana with that raucous crowd that's going to be there. They're waiting for them to come back. So they got to take game 2, nod this series up, I believe, you know, to get back into the series, get a fold of it, get some momentum going. It should be an interesting game 2, a really, really intriguing one. I do expect Oklahoma City to possibly bounce back in this one. Who knows? Indiana may steal two on the road and go up 2-0 going back home. That would be absolutely something, which they have done against the Knicks, at least stealing the first two on the road, and then the Cavaliers stealing the first two on the road on their home court. So Indiana's not afraid. They know they didn't play their best, I think. They had about 30, almost 30 turnovers, and usually teams would get blown out by 30, 40 points against the Oklahoma City Thunder, blowing about 30 turnovers with that because they turn that into points. They swipe at that ball. They have so many defenders to throw at you, but the Pacers just hung in there and they stole it in the end. What a game! And I think Oklahoma City, with the talent they have, the coaching they have, I think they'll find a way. I think it should be really really intriguing game two, but it should be really really how they respond into this game two. They've got to check where they made their mistakes at, what they think they could have corrected from game one. I think it's going to be very important for them to take game two at home. I think otherwise you don't want to go down 0-2, especially losing your first two at home in the NBA Finals. So, and also I wanted to mention for them the Oklahoma City Thunder, their top performers. They did have Shea with 38 points, 14 for 30 from the field, 14 for 30 from the field, and J-Dubs, Jalen Williams, about 6 for 19 from the field, 17 points, and then you also had Chet with 6. I mean, you had Luke Dort with 15. He was everywhere as well, hitting 5 3-pointers. He was rebounding, he was hustling, and including Alex Caruso dropping 11 too, and Isaiah Hartenstein with 9. So I think they've got to have some other players step up for them to take game two at home. They've got to set the tone early, I believe, and get that crowd going, and get a pretty big lead where they know Indiana possibly doesn't have any chance at a comeback, which that'd be possibly, it really could be very different with the way they game plan and they scheme in this one. So we shall see. Anyways, hitting more into the off season, I would say the outlook. There are some really pretty interesting free agents that's going to be available, as well as the trade deadline. What we're going to expect with some key superstars and key players. It's going to be really really interesting to see like teams like the Detroit Pistons, the Houston Rockets, the San Antonio Spurs, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Golden State Warriors, how they're going to improve their team. And then also with the Dallas Mavericks, they have a pretty big team. With that trade they did with the Luka trade to get AD, and then also winning the lottery to get the number one overall pick, potentially taking Cooper Flag. Teaming up with Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, and Anthony Davis, and Gafford as well, Derek Lively. So this is going to be a pretty size team, like pretty big team, and I think they can still compete, for a higher seed. They've got about 11 or 12 teams in the West that could potentially be fighting for playoff spots. There's going to be some pretty good teams we may be expecting in the play-in that we wouldn't expect to be in the play-in next year. So it's going to be pretty crazy. We're gonna expect. There also are whispers about Trey Young and Donovan Mitchell. There were players like that. I was like, Donovan Mitchell just leading the Cavs to a 1 seed, with the Cleveland Cavaliers, getting to the second round, but getting bounced by the Indiana Pacers in 5 games was not expected. They did have some injuries in a few games in that one, but honestly, I did expect them to be in the Eastern Conference Finals, as well as the Boston Celtics. But things happen, injuries happen. But I mean, credit to the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers to getting there, upsetting the Celtics, both them and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So it should be a pretty crazy offseason that we're going to expect. The Lakers as well, they're looking to getting some bigs, as I like to mention on my last pod that I had with my special guest Sean Rutledge. We did talk about quite a few things about how the NBA offseason can pan out. what we're gonna expect for these big market, like we talked about big markets in the NBA, not in the NBA right now, like Oklahoma City Thunder and Indiana Pacers, how we expected, like, everybody likes to see the big market teams in the final showdown, in the finals, ratings, etc. But this is like what I wanted to say was the Indiana Pacers and Oklahoma City Thunder just gave us a great game one. They gave us a great game one, and probably we don't what to expect to come. For games like this, these tight knit games, these just pure basketball. It was pretty fun to see. I really really liked it. This gets me to my next sponsor. Also wanted to mention Alfredo Melendez, real estate advisor with KOLLAB Real Estate. Alfredo at collaborate.com, 408-568-8288. Once again, 408-568-8288. His license number out there. Sponsored by Crossover Sports Talk and Events. Also, now what I wanted to get into is with the Golden State Warriors, moving forward with the NBA. What do you think they could potentially do? Or is it going to be possibly a time to run it back again or add another piece to Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Stephen Curry? Or is it going to be, what are they going to do with Jonathan Kuminga? Are they going to sign and trade for him? Or is Giannis possibly in the mix of heading to the Warriors with all the assets they have and some draft capital they think they can use to potentially make a package for Giannis Antetokounmpo, because we know there's rumblings about him leaving Milwaukee and Damian Lillard with the torn Achilles and Chris Middleton not there anymore, and their depth as well. They may be losing some players in this offseason. I think they are a pretty alerted team to take a look at in the offseason to see what can go on with the Bucks and with the Warriors. Also, there were rumblings about him possibly heading out to there's Oklahoma City that was also in the mix, and they're in the NBA Finals. There was rumors about how many they have 5 draft picks this summer, and then so many more in like the future with Sam Presti acquiring all those picks. What they potentially can do, throw in some players with their get a Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Houston Rockets. They do have some vets that with Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams of the worlds, and then great coach in Ime Udoka. They got a pretty good young players in Sengun, and then Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, stun athletic defender, that could score on the inside, and they possibly have some assets and picks that they can throw and get a star there, which I think kind of helped them. Down the stretch in that Game 7 against the Warriors in the first round was probably their missing piece of why they possibly didn't move on into the second round. So they're possibly looking at getting a star out there in Houston. What there are some predictions. What we're probably going to be expecting to see. I do possibly see the East. With the Celtics, I don't really know what might go on with them. It depends on Jason Tatum's injury and how they're going to compete against the other Eastern Conference competitors in the playoffs. That's potentially going to happen. They still have a pretty good team, but there were some rumblings about Al Horford and Drew Holiday potentially leaving or retirement. What's so not? We should see what goes on there. The Knicks, potentially Kevin Durant. There's some rumors, and I was hearing today, they were probably trying to make a package for Karl Anthony Towns, maybe OJ Anunoby or Mikal Bridges to get Kevin Durant back in New York when he was in Brooklyn. Not technically New York. He was in Brooklyn after he left the Golden State Warriors back in 2019 to join the Brooklyn Nets, which didn't work out eventually. They did end up going to a semifinal and losing in 7 against the Milwaukee Bucks to the eventual champions in 2021. So this should be a pretty intriguing NBA offseason. Now, moving on to the NFL, it's going to be pretty crazy to see what we see right now, what we're looking at in the NFL offseason. There are some teams that we're looking at in the AFC East. You have the New York Jets and adding Justin Fields for about 2 years, and Aaron Rodgers leaving the Jets and going to the Pittsburgh Steelers on a 1-year deal. That was pretty also interesting as well. I think there's going to be a pretty rough division that they're in with the Cleveland Browns, possibly, getting some of their players back, adding Nathan Graham, and including Deshaun Watson possibly back in that lineup, and then drafting Shador Sanders in the fifth round. There is the Baltimore Ravens. We can't forget. They're the division winners, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and that defense with Kyle Hamilton, John Harbaugh leading the way. They're always a threat. They're always dangerous. They're always Super Bowl contenders. And then you also have the Cincinnati Bengals. Um, Joe Burrow having such a historic season, but the defense was historically bad this past year in 2024. So they did pay T. Higgins and Jamar Chase quite handsomely this offseason. I think it's going to be them for them to build the defense for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they had some work to do. They did draft some defenders so they can help out. Get some help on that defense. They did fire their defensive coordinator, so they wanted to move forward with that. And then also what we're going to possibly expect to see in the NFC West with the San Francisco 49ers, with the moves they made. They did lose quite hefty amount of players with Drake Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, Javarius Ward of the world, and they just released their punter, Mitch Wisnowski. They fired their defensive coordinator, fired the special team coach. They did hire back Robert Sala and Brent Boyer as a special team coach coming from the Jets. They did add extended Fred Warner, Brock Purdy, and George Kittle. And also with the draft, they went heavily with that defensive line, and also making a trade for Bryce Huff from the Philadelphia Eagles. Quite not fitting in that system in that 3-4 for Vic Fangio, what he ran over there. And then with Robert Saleh, he did have about 10 sacks and had one of the fastest pressure rates coming off the edge in that 4-3 scheme when he had with Saleh coaching there in 2023. So that familiarity with him coming back to the NFC West to join the 49ers was a pretty interesting move, I believe. And I think it could help them bolster them with that pass rush specialist that what they had with D Ford back when they had that Super Bowl run in 2019. He did draft Michael Williams. He's already edge rush setter, and then possibly I think on third downs they're gonna kick him inside against guards. Then you also already have Nick Bosa, who's good against the pass and the run, and then you also drafted Alfred Collins and C.J. West in the second and the fourth round. So, and then drafting Nick Martin at linebacker to replace Dre Greenlaw. So that's going to be a pretty interesting team to look at. I also believe in the AFC West, it's going to be pretty interesting to see with the Kansas City Chiefs, possibly Kelsey's last year, with Andy Reid and Mahomes still leading the way, going to 3 straight Super Bowls, losing this past one, just falling short of not three-peating, being the first team ever to three-peat. There's also the Los Angeles Chargers, who we expect got a little bit better with Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, bolstering that O-line that they did, drafting Joe Alt last year, and then the defense, them getting a little bit better there. They're also a threat with so many deep, heavy quarterbacks in the AFC. And then you do have the Denver Broncos and Bo Nix, who had a pretty good rookie season. Very, very interesting from what he did. They have a pretty good team. They have a no-fly zone, drafting the corner out of Texas and with Pat Surtain and DJ Jones, straight adding Greenlaw and Hufanga. They've already have a good secondary, and now they have a better even front, I believe. They could be very dangerous too. They're potentially, they were a wild card team. I think they can even move forward to be in the playoffs, possibly moving up more seedings in the AFC. And then we also have, we're expecting in the AFC South, we do have the Houston Texans, we do have the Indianapolis Colts, we do have the Tennessee Titans. That's also another pretty interesting division with CJ Stroud and D'Amico Ryans and Jimmy Ward and Tank Dell and them of the worlds of Joe Mixon leading the way. And then we also have Anthony Richardson and the Colts. And Also, the Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, possibly a resurgence, with him and adding the head coach, who they just hired this offseason. And then the Titans, what they're going to do with Cam Ward, it should be the number one overall pick. That's a pretty quarterback heavy conference, like we mentioned. Not to mention like up and coming, like these players haven't even like Cam Ward haven't stepped, but they are just filled with loaded with talent in the AFC with quarterbacks. So we shall see. We shall see. And then the AFC East, cannot forget Josh Allen and the Bills, always a Super Bowl threat, Super Bowl contenders. Um, they're always building. They're favored in almost their I think every game this year. So they're going to be always a threat to go at. The New England Patriots adding Mike Vrabel as their head coach, building on that D line, you know, adding in some weapons offensively for Drake May, drafting Will Campbell with that fourth pick. They are always going to be, building up with that Patriot way. The Kraft family, how they love to run it there, the Belichicks of the world, and they had the Brady with Tom Brady there. It should be um, pretty much more competitive in that division as well. Just the conference is crazy enough. And then we also have the New York Jets with Justin Fields over there. Him with that Aaron Glenn, getting him as the Lions defensive coordinator, as a head coach now, him leading the way and instilling that culture. I think Justin Fields is a pretty good fit, going along with Brees Hall and Garrett Wilson over there. They're going to be a pretty good team. And then I think they drafted in the first round as well. So they need to stock up on that offensive line. I think, protect Justin Fields, get that running game going, see how they can, and let Aaron Glenn lead that defense. Then moving back to the NFC, um, we do have the NFC South. We have Bryce Young in another year with him, building with him, drafting the receiver Tet, out of Arizona. We do have the Falcons with Michael Penix era starting, Kirk Cousins potentially, you know, not there anymore. We'll see what goes on with the Atlanta Falcons. Lots of young quarterbacks, and then the Saints having Derek Carr retire and not even taking that 30 million, for them. Just saving all that for the New Orleans Saints. I think they're still rebuilding and trying to recoup some future draft picks to rebuild that team that they have with Kellen Moore, what he can do over there. And then, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you still have Baker Mayfield and the Bucks. With them, they got Chris Godwin, Mike Evans still leading the way. Not to mention, I forgot they lost Liam Cohn to the Jacksonville Jaguars, becoming the head coach over there. So should be interesting to see what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers do again this year. And Baker Mayfield, I think he's found a very good home over there in the past 2 years that he's played over there. He's been pretty solid, ever since, he was in Cleveland. He was in LA for quite a quick stint in Carolina as well. But Tampa Bay has been his home, and he's been so consistent. It's a very good quarterback over there. Um, should be interesting. And then also, I wanted to recoup with the NFC East. You did have the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. They did lose some defenders. They did lose some players, but they did draft Jihad Campbell near the end of that first round, swooping him. Howie Roseman does his works, building in those trenches and grabbing those skill players. They're still very dangerous, I think, as well, even though losing their offensive coordinator. They still got Vic Fangio over there leading that defense, and Sirianni as head coach, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley. Congrats to him being the cover of Madden 26. So they're a very interesting team, very good team, very elite team. And then you have got the Dallas Cowboys with Dak Prescott coming back, you know, trading for George Pickens, with pairing him with CeeDee Lamb. Should be a really good offense. See how Dak responds with that. And then their new head coach, Marty Schottenheimer, um, should be pretty good. Not Marty Schottenheimer, excuse me, head coach, over there that we got in Dallas. And then the New York Giants, we do have them potentially, with Dable, and then Russell Wilson there, Jameis Winston there, and then them drafting Jackson Dart. Um, they're going to be, pairing him with Wilson and then Malik Neighbors, grooming him, trying to get him ready to have those reps to be the potential starter one day. Um, they look like that division is getting pretty hectic and competitive as well because the Washington Commanders, the NFC champ, they played the Philadelphia, not the NFC champ, the last championship against the Philadelphia Eagles. In the NFC Championship, they did trounce by them, but they're also added Debo Samuel, in the trade from San Francisco. Um, it should be a pretty competitive division as well. And then you have the NFC North, the Detroit Lions, who possibly a lot of people expected to be in the Super Bowl last year, got bounced by the Washington Commanders in the divisional round. They did lose both their coordinators, and Frank Ragnow, their center, just retired at 29 years old, pretty young. It's a pretty big blow to their offensive line, which they've been stout, top 3, top 5 offensive line in the league. Got some big boys up there with Penei Sewell, you know, and then you do have Jared Goff. You still got Dan Campbell leading the way there as the head coach, and they did have a lot of players on IR last year, including Aiden Hutchinson and him. Man, that gruesome injury that he had. Hopefully him coming back, recovering really quickly, it will really boost the Lions, I believe. Losing their coordinators, we shall see how they do. And then you do have the Green Bay Packers, who did make the playoffs, and Jordan Love had a great year. Them acquiring Josh Jacobs and the plethora of receivers that they have there as well. And then their defense, the good young defense as well, that's playing pretty good. They've been in the playoffs in back-to-back seasons now. They did lose to the Philadelphia Eagles in the first round last season. So they're going to be pretty interesting to bounce back. And then the Minnesota Vikings, you know, losing Sam Darnold to the Seahawks. JJ McCarthy possibly leading the way. You got a great coach in Kevin O'Connell there, and then they possibly, them getting Mekhi Blackman back at corner. Next year, they've got a pretty good young defense, including with the way Flores runs his defense over there. So it's pretty with the exotic blitzes, exotic coverages, exotic schemes. They're a pretty good team as well. And then it gets me to the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams, how they bolstered so much, acquiring Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions, building that O line around Caleb Williams, and the weapons that they have with him. They're going to be pretty good as well. And then them getting some edge rushers, they really fixed their trenches a lot. So they're going to be a team to watch in the this upcoming season, in the 2025 NFL season. And then we also have, I would like to get back to the NFC West, as I got to talk about the South, the North, and the East. We did just talk about the 49ers. We do have the LA Rams. They are that team adding, including Devontae Adams. They did lose Cooper Kupp. They do have Puka Nacua. They do have a good young defense. Jared Verse, Vizquez out there. Akilla Witherspoon is playing pretty good. They're really good. And Matt Stafford's still there. Sean McVay. So they're the defending NFC West champs. So they're going to be pretty interesting and another good team to look as well. Them possibly battling it out with the 49ers. The Cardinals, Kyler Murray and, Jonathan Gannon, them adding Walter Nolan with that first pick, who I loved. I had a draft crush on. Possibly the 49ers can get him at 11, but he was taken by the Cardinals. And them also getting Will Johnson in the second round, a steal, I believe. People were really worried about his knees, but I think he's got all that talent that he pertained from Michigan. So the Cardinals will be another team to, be wary about again. They're really frisky as well. And then that gets me to the Seattle Seahawks. Sam Darnold signing a big deal with them, acquiring Cooper Kupp, Mike McDonald, see what he can do over there with that defense. He loves to acquire, what he did especially with that Ravens defense a couple years ago and when they went to the AFC Championship game. Him getting his guys, acquiring made that defense get even better. I think as the year went on, this division just got better. So we should see how it goes. Also wanted to mention another sponsor for your taco guy, Livermore's local family-owned taquiza catering. Authentic Mexican food and top-tier service. Call 925-339-5857 to book. Hashtag your taco guy, 925. Okay. Then once again, I'd like to thank you guys all for checking out this latest episode from Crossover Sports Talk and Events. That'll do it for the rest of this night. Just wanted to follow up with you guys. I'm gonna be having more sponsors and more guests up in the future. Please stay tuned and thank you so much and have a great night.